Hello and welcome to NEWS.am. I'm Haik Saakian, this Factor of Power, and today I'm joined by Ambassador John Bolton, former US National Security Advisor to President Trump. So, Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much for your time.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Ambassador Bolton, you have advocated for striking Iran and overthrowing the ruling elite for a long time. The assassination of the former supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, didn't lead to the collapse of the system, and now his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, another hardliner and maybe much tougher than his father, has now been elected as new supreme leader of Iran and claimed in his first public statement to take revenge. What do you think? What must happen in Iran for the United States and Israel to consider their mission accomplished?
Well, it certainly entails much, much more than the removal of one supreme leader. This is a regime that's been in power for 47 years. It's tried to entrench itself. It's not just the Ayatollahs, it's the Revolutionary Guard as well. In fact, there's a good argument that really it's the Revolutionary Guard that's running the country, with the Ayatollahs and the supreme leader being more ideological coverage. So I think this is a very extensive effort. I think it means working with the opposition inside Iran, which is very widespread but not well organized, and trying to bring cracks and fissures and disputes to the top of the regime that will help fragment it further, lead to its internal disarray and eventual collapse. I think we've already done that to an extent. I think everybody believed when Ali Khamenei finally died, there would be a succession crisis because he was only the second supreme leader, and there had only been one transition from the time of the revolution. Now we've accelerated the succession crisis, and I think the election of Mojtaba Khamenei shows really how difficult a position the regime is now in. If he dies or is unable to continue, they're forced into another succession crisis. And this is the kind of dynamic that, once it takes hold, can cause even an authoritarian regime to collapse very quickly.
The new supreme leader of Iran made it clear that there would be no surrender of Iran. And what do you think? What now are the United States and Israel going to do further? Is Mojtaba Khamenei another target for them now?
Well, I think he's still a target. He's the National Command Authority. He's a legitimate military target, as are the others in his government. I don't think it was ever right to contemplate a surrender. In this case, I think it's the collapse of the regime, and the most likely outcome, the most benign outcome in the near term, would be a military government composed of generals from the regular military in Iran, not the Revolutionary Guard, but the conventional military, who could help restore order over what may be a very tumultuous period, and then give the Iranian people the chance to have some kind of consultative process to decide on what their new governmental, new constitutional system would look like. And I think that once we saw a government not run by these religious fanatics, that would be a moment to reach out to them.
So let's imagine that the system is toppled. President Trump claimed personal involvement in the selection process of a new supreme leader in Iran. How do you envision the process of forming a new leadership approved by the United States and Israel?
I don't see that Trump or Israel or anybody else is going to play any meaningful role in supreme leader succession decisions. I think the regime thinks that that's for them to decide, and they really couldn't care less about outsiders. And that's just another piece of evidence that ultimately the only real success here is seeing this regime disappear. If the war ends and they're still in power, they might well be worse than they were before. As you said earlier, Mojtaba could well be, likely is, more hardline than his father. That's not making progress, to say the least.
Well, there is no success story for US interventions in the Middle East. Taliban, for example, is back to power in Afghanistan. Iraq is no longer a viable state. Libya remains trapped in a civil war. So those are all failed states plagued by chaos, not prosperity they were promised before. What's the guarantee that Iran will not become another Iraq or Syria?
Well, I think you have to look at each case separately. I think in the case of Afghanistan, for example, it wasn't the overthrow of the Taliban that caused instability. It was our departing Afghanistan that allowed the Taliban to come back. And in connection with Libya, I think That's a circumstance where rival factions inside Libya couldn't reach agreement. Same was true in Syria, although the new strongman there appears to be more in control. That's not necessarily a good thing, but he's certainly there. And Iraq was never a country to begin with. It was created by Europeans in the Treaty of Versailles process after World War I. The Europeans didn't want to address the question of the Kurdish nation, which is still with us today, and we see it playing out. But my main objective in the case of regime change in Iran is a regime that doesn't pursue nuclear weapons and support international terrorism. And if we could get, as I say, a military government in the immediate aftermath of the collapse of the Ayatollahs, I think that would be a step forward.
The International Atomic Energy Agency says there was no evidence that Iran was developing a nuclear weapon. Meanwhile, Oman, the mediator in the last US-Iran talks, claimed the parties were so close to an agreement prior to the war. So why did the United States and Israel decided to attack Iran, especially when Trump has been branding himself as a peace-building and peace-bringer president?
Well, figuring out what goes through Trump's mind requires a psychiatrist, which I am not. But I can say that the record is very clear that Iran has never shown any evidence of a strategic decision to give up its pursuit of nuclear weapons. Certainly willing to reach agreements, as it did in 2015, as it was playing for time to do here, that would result in a lifting of sanctions by the West. That would enable it to try and rebuild its very, very damaged economy. But there's no indication that they were prepared really to adhere to these agreements. And I think it was the 2015 agreement was badly flawed. And I didn't see anything about the current negotiations that would address those flaws. So it goes to the nature of the regime itself. The pursuit of nuclear weapons and support for terrorism are baked into their ideological DNA. And that wasn't going to change, meaning their behavior wouldn't change, meaning the only real alternative is regime change.
Ambassador Bolton, U.S. administrations and Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have claimed for 30 years that Iran was a few months or weeks away from gaining a nuclear weapon. This was repeatedly argued for 30 years, but yet no nuclear weapon has been developed in Iran. So isn't it reasonable to suspect that the real motive of this war was the nuclear threat?
Well, I can't speak for others. It was never a question of saying they were weeks or months away from it. The fact was they proceeded in fits and starts. Their work was inhibited over decades because they were trying to hide it from the rest of the world. And they had their own internal issues with failures in the program. But the direction of travel was never in doubt. And I personally don't think that the U.S. has to wait until an adversary is one stitch away from having a complete nuclear weapon, because it was the strategic decision by Iran to pursue the weapon in violation of their international obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that indicated they were determined to get it. And I think we were within our legitimate self-defense rights and those of other countries to make sure they never got close.
Israel doesn't hide its ambition for greater Israel stretching from Nile to the Euphrates, if you refer to the biblical interpretations. And this supposed for Israel to have larger boundaries encompassing large territories from the Middle Eastern countries. And furthermore, the United States ambassador to Israel has argued recently in one of his interviews that Israel may have a right on the vast territories of Middle East. Isn't it a ground to suppose that Iran is an obstacle for the regional hegemony of the United States and Israel?
Well, I think Ambassador Huckabee was corrected by the State Department after he said that. I think the issues in dispute for Israel are Gaza and the West Bank, but the threat to Israel that Iran posed was manifested not just by Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons, but by its support for terrorists like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis that after October 7 and 23 really unleashed a huge assault on Israel. Now, it turned out that Israel responded and debilitated Hamas and Hezbollah, certainly to Iran's great disadvantage. But this just goes to show how long Iran has been pursuing these objectives. And for Americans, we remember the first thing practically the Islamic Revolution did in 1979 was seize our diplomats, another violation of international law for those who care, and hold them for 444 days. And then, using predecessor groups to Hezbollah, in 1983, bombed the American embassy in Beirut, bombed the Marine barracks and the French barracks that were there as an international peacekeeping force, killed hundreds, perhaps thousands of America with rocket-propelled grenades and improvised explosive devices during the war in Iraq. So Iran has been at war with us and with Israel really since the founding of the Islamic Republic.
What do you think? Is there a plan to divide Iran into different parts?
No, I don't think there's any plan like that. I think it's in the nature of Iran itself that it has a lot of ethnic groups that are very dissatisfied with the regime they're living under. I would favor aiding those ethnic groups if they ask for it, but I think our position should be we want a regime after the Ayatollahs that controls the full territory of Iran that we see now, so preserving Iran's territorial integrity.
So what do you think, what are the expectations of the United States regarding Armenia and Azerbaijan in South Caucasus in this situation?
Well, it's a dangerous neighborhood to be sure, but I think the chances for peace and security are much enhanced if the regime of the Ayatollahs is overthrown. There will never be real peace and security in the Middle East as long as they're in power. And I think the chances for development, economic growth for the Caucasus and really everyone in and around Iran are much greater once they're out of power.
What do you think about the perspectives for the TRIPP project in our region?
Well, I think that would have a greater chance of success, along with everything else, if there were cooperation with the government in Iran that wasn't determined to pursue terrorism and nuclear weapons. I think this would be a big encouragement to foreign investors all across the region. That the threat that Iran poses now is a huge disincentive for foreign capital. And the more foreign direct investment you could get, obviously, the better the economies of all the countries affected.
Ambassador Bolton, you visited Armenia as National Security Advisor to President Trump in 2019, met with the Prime Minister of Armenia, and then called to abandon historical stereotypes in Armenia's foreign policy. What did you mean then?
Well, what I was looking for all three nations in the Caucasus was to avoid getting trapped into returning to a closer relationship with Russia or being dominated by Iran. And it's tough when you're kind of squeezed between two powers like that. And I felt that in the case of Armenia, the tilt back toward Russia was very dangerous. I'm afraid we're seeing consequences of a similar nature next door in Georgia. I think the future of all the Caucasus countries really is in looking toward the West. And I think there are ways to enhance that. And I hope that would be the policy that the people of Armenia and the others would choose.
Well, are the United States and Israel pushing now Azerbaijan and Turkey to join this war against Iran?
Well, look, I think it's in the common interest of everybody there to see the regime overthrown. I think Trump made a mistake by not consulting with friends and allies in advance, not necessarily to describe the exact details or the timing of this operation, but to say, we think it's time to take some decisive action here and get them on board before the war began, not afterward.
And the last question, how long do you think this war will last? And is Trump going to put boots on the ground and launch a ground invasion in Iran?
Well, I don't think Trump has any intention of combat arms, infantry, armor, artillery going in. There may be special operators or specific operations that combat troops need to fulfill, but I don't see anything like an invasion of Iraq kind of scenario in Iran.
Thank you very much for your time, Ambassador Bolton.
Well, thank you very much for having me.